Money is based on two universal principles: a universal a universal convertibility. With money as an alchemist, you can turn land into loyalty, justice into health, and violence into knowledge. B. The universal trust. With money as a go-between, and two people can cooperate on any project. These principles have enabled millions of strangers to cooperate effectively in trade and industry, but these seemingly benign principles, benign or benic, benign,
benign,
present, and kind. But these seemingly benign principles have a dark side. Shortcut to add a note in book. On mark. Control click. Xong rồi add note. Ok. Ok, nhanh hơn rồi á. But these seemingly benign principles have a dark side. When everything is convertible, and when trust depends on anonymous coins and cowrie shouts, it corrodes local traditions. It corrodes location. It corrodes. It means it's break. Is it? If meta corrode of something corrodes, it is slowly damaged by something, just say rain or water. So corrode, it's oxy hóa, ăn mòn. Intimate relations and human value, replacing them with the cold laws of supply and demand. Human communities and families have always been based on belief in priceless things such as honor, loyalty, morality, and love. These things lie outside the domain of the market, and they shouldn't be bought or sold for money. Even if the market offers a good price, certain things just aren't done. Parents mustn't sell their children into slavery. A devout Christian must not commit a mortal sin. A loyal knight must never betray his lord. And ancestral tribal land shall never be sold to foreigners. Money has always tried to break through these barriers, like water seeping through cracks in a dam. Parents have been reduced to selling some of their children into slavery in order to buy food for the others. Devout Christians have murdered, stolen, and cheated, and later used their spoils to buy forgiveness from the church. Ambitious knights auctioned their allegiance to the highest bidder, while securing the loyalty of their own followers by cash payments. Tribal lands were sold to foreigners from the other side of the world in order to purchase an entry ticket into the global economy. Money has an even darker side, for although money builds universal trust between strangers, this trust is invested not in humans, community, or sacred values, but in money itself and in the impersonal systems that back it. We do not trust the stranger or the next door neighbor, we trust the coin they hold. If they run out of coins, we run out of trust, as money brings down the dams of community, religion, and state. The world is in danger of becoming one big and rather heartless marketplace. Hence, the economic history of humankind is a delicate dance. People rely on money to facilitate cooperation with strangers, but they affair it with corrupt human values and intimate relations. With one hand, people willings destroy the communal development of monies and commerce for so long. Yet, with the other hand, they build new dams to protect society, religions, and the environment from enslavement to market forces. It is common nowadays to believe that the market always prevails and that the dams erected by kings, priests, and communities cannot long hold back the tides of money. This is naive. Brutal warriors, religious fanatics, and concerned citizens have repeatedly managed to trounce calculating merchants and even to reshape the economy. It is therefore impossible to understand the unification of humankind as a purely economic process. In order to understand how 2,000 of isolated cultures coalesce, it's combined hợp nhất lại coalesce không coalesce coalesce
Coalesce. Coalesce.
coalesced coalesced over time to form the global village of today. We must take into account the role of gold and silver, but we cannot disregard the equally crucial role of steel. Imperial vision, tầm nhìn vĩnh cửu. Đế chế à? Đế chế. Imperial, belonging really to an empire or the person or country that rule it. Cái gì nhảy nhảy ở đây đấy hả? Tầm nhìn đế chế. The ancient Romans were used to being defeated, like the rulers of most of history's great empires. They could lose battle after battle but still win the war. Mình cần học chuỗi Duolingo. Đây là bát cháo trong chữ tiếng Trung Quốc. Tại sao người ta không vẽ một cái hình bát cháo cho nó dễ nhỉ? Nhìn như thế này không thể tưởng tượng được ra đây là bát cháo. Cháo. Quá nhiều nét. Ok, xong. An empire that cannot sustain a blow and remain standing is not really an empire. Yet even the Romans found it hard to stomach the news arriving from northern Iberia in the middle of the 2nd century BC. A small, significant mountain town called Numantia, inhabited by the peninsula's native Celts, has dared to throw off the Roman yoke. Rome at the time was the unquestioned master of the entire Mediterranean basin, having vanquished the Macedonian and the Seleucid Empire, subjugated the proud city-states of Greece, and turned Carthage into a smoldering ruin. The Numantians had nothing on their side but their fierce love of freedom and their inhospitable terrain. Yet they forced legion after legion to surrender or retreat in shame. Eventually, in 834 BC, Roman patience snapped. The Senate decided to send Scipio Aemilianus, Rome's foremost general, and the man who had leveled Carthage, to take care of the Numantians. He was given a massive army of more than 30,000 soldiers. Scipio, who respected the fighting spirit and martial skills of the Numantians, preferred not to waste his soldiers in unnecessary combat. Instead, he encircled Numantia with a line of fortifications, blocking the town's contact with the outside world. Hunger did this work for him. After more than a year, the food supply ran out. When the Numantians realized that all hope was lost, they burned down their town. According to Roman accounts, most of them killed themselves so as not to become Roman slaves. Numantian later became a symbol of Spanish independence and courage. Miguel de Cervantes, the author of Don Quixote, wrote Miguel de Cervantes, the author of Don Quixote, wrote a treatise called The Siege of Numantia, which ends with the town's destruction, but also with a vision of Spain's future greatness. Poets composed paeans to its fierce defenders, and painters committed majestic depictions of the shark to canvas. Paeans. Paean.
Paean.
Paean. Paean. Paean. Poets composed paeans to its fierce defenders, and painters committed majestic depictions to their sharks to canvas. In 1818, 1882, its ruins were declared a national monument and became a pilgrimage site for Spanish patriots in the 1960s and 1950s and 1960s. The most popular comic books in Spain weren't about Superman and Spider-Man. They told of the adventure of El Jabato, an imaginary ancient Iberian hero who fought against the Roman oppressors. The ancient Numantians are to this day Spain's paragons of heroism and patriotism, cast as role models for the country's young people. Yet Spanish patriots extol the Numantians in Spanish, a Romance language that is a progeny of Scipio's Latin. The Numantians spoke a now dead and lost Celtic language. Cervantes wrote the Siacs of Numantia in Latin script, and the play follows Greco-Roman artistic models. Numantian had no theaters. Spanish patriots who admire Numantian heroism tend also to be loyal followers of the Roman Catholic Church. Don't miss that first word. A church whose leader still sits in Rome and whose God prefers to be addressed in Latin. Similarly, modern Spanish law derives from Roman law. Spanish politics is built on Roman foundations, and Spanish cuisine and architecture own a far is it called own ow ow own a far greater debt to Roman. No, no. Oh,
Oh,
oh. Okay. So, and Spanish cuisine and architecture owe a far greater debt to Roman legacies than to those of the south of Iberia. Nothing is really left on Numantia save ruins. Even its story has riches, thanks only to the writing of Roman historians. It was tailored to the taste of Roman audiences, which released tales of freedom-loving barbarians. Barbarians. The victory of Rome over Numantia was so complete that the victors called of the vanquished. It's not our kind of story. We like to see underdogs win, but there's no justice in history. Most partners have sooner or later fallen prey to the armies or of some ruthless empire, which have consigned them to oblivion. Empires, too, ultimately fall, but they tend to leave behind rich and enduring legacies. Almost all people in the 21st century are the offspring of one empire or another. Okay. What is an empire? Thế nào là một hoàng thượng? Lại là đế chế. Nãy mình học một từ khác là đế chế mà. Imperial mà. A group of country ruled by a single person, government or country. Vương quốc. Đế chế à? Hai từ đế chế sao? Okay. An empire is a political order with two important characteristics. First, to qualify for that designation, you have to rule over a significant number of distinct peoples, each possessing a different cultural identity and a separate territory. How many people exactly? Two or three is not sufficient. 20 or 30 is plenty. The imperial threshold passed somewhere in between. Second, empires are characterized by flexible borders and a potentially unlimited appetite. They can swallow and digest more and more nations and territories without altering their basic structure or identity. The British state of today has fairly clear borders that cannot be exceeded without altering the fundamental structures and identity of the state. A century ago, almost any place on earth could have become part of the British Empire. Cultural diversity and territorial flexibility give empires not only their unique character but also their central role in history. It's thanks to these two characteristics that empires have managed to unite diverse ethnic groups and ecological zones under a single political umbrella, thereby furthering, thereby fus- thereby fusing together larger and larger segments of the human species and of planet Earth. It should be stressed that an empire is defined solely by its cultural diversity and flexible borders rather than by its origins, its form of government, its territorial extent, or the size of its population. An empire need not emerge from military conquest. The Athenian Empire began its life as a voluntary liege, and the Habsburg Empire was born in wedlock, coupled together by a string of shrewd marriage alliances. Nor must an empire be ruled by an autocratic emperor. The British Empire, the largest empire in history, was ruled by a democracy. Other democratic, or at least republican, empires have included the modern Dutch, French, Belgian, and American empires, as well as the pre-modern empires of Novgorod, Rome, Carthage, and Athens. Size too does not really matter. Trời ơi, mũi cắn ngứa quá. Empires can be puny. The Athenian Empire and its zenith was much smaller in size and population than today's Greece. The Aztec Empire was smaller than today's Mexico. Both were nevertheless empires, whereas modern Greece and modern Mexico are not, because the former gradually subdued dozens and even hundreds of different polities, while the latter have not. Athens lorded it over more than 100 formerly independent city-states, whereas the Aztec Empire, if we can trust its taxation records, ruled 371 different tribes and peoples. Puny,
puny,
puny.
puny,
Puny. Okay. Okay. Đâu rồi ta? Whereas modern Greece and modern Mexico are not, because the former gradually subdued dozens and even hundreds of different polities, while the latter have not. Athens lorded over more than 100 formerly independent city-states, whereas the Aztec Empire, if we can trust in taxation records, ruled 371 different tribes and peoples. How was it possible to squeeze such a human potpourri into the territory of a modest modern state? It was possible because in the past there were many more distinct people in the world, each of which had smaller population and occupied less territory than today's typical people. The land between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River, which today struggles to satisfy the ambitions of just two people, easily accommodated in biblical times dozens of nations, tribes, pretty kingdoms, and city-states. Empires were only the main reason for the drastic reductions in human diversity. The imperial steamroller gradually obliterated the unique characteristics of numerous people, such as the Numantians, forging out of them new and much larger groups. Evil empires. Đế chế ma quỷ, tà ác. In our time, imperialists rank second only to fascist in the lexicon of political swear words. Là sao? Fascist. Fascist. Ghê vậy sao? The contemporary critic In our time, imperialists rank second only to fascists in the lexicon of political swear words.
In our time, imperial is ranked second only to fascist in the Mexican of political swear words.
Fascist. 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 Fascist.
Fascist.
Fascist. Fascist. Okay, buka đi. The contemporary critique of empires commonly takes two forms. Empires do not work in the long run. It is not possible to rule effectively over a large number of conquered peoples. 2. Even if it can be done, it should not be done, because empires are evil engines of destruction and exploitation. Exploitation.
Exploitation.
Exploitation. Every people has a right to self-determination and should never be subject to the rule of another. From a historical perspective, the first statement is plain nonsense, and the second is deeply problematic. The truth is that empire has been the world's most common form of political organization for the last 2,500 years. Most humans during these 2.5 millennia have lived in empires. Empires is also a very stable form of government. Most empires have found it alarmingly easy to put down rebellions. In general, they have been toppled only by external invasion or by a split within the ruling elite. Conversely, conquered peoples don't have a very good record of freeing themselves from their imperial overlords. Most have remained subjugated for hundreds of years. Typically, they have been slowly digested by the conquering empire until their distinct cultures fizzle out. For example, when the Western Roman Empire finally fell to invading Germanic tribes in 476 AD, the Numerians, Albani, Helvetians, Samnites, Lusitanians, Umbrians, Etruscans, and hundreds of other forgotten peoples whom the Romans conquered centuries earlier did not emerge from the empire's eviscerated carcass like Jonah from the belly of the great fish. None of them were left the biological descendants of the people who had identified themselves as members of those nations, who had spoken their languages, worshipped their gods, and told their myths and legends, now thought, spoke, and worshipped as Romans. In many cases, the destruction of one empire hardly meant independence for subject peoples. Instead, a new empire stepped into the vacuum created when the old one collapsed or recreated. Nowhere has it been more obvious than in the Middle East. The current political constellation in that region, a balance of power between many independent political entities with more or less stable borders, is almost without parallel any time in the last several millennia. The last time the Middle East experienced such a situation was in the 8th century BC, almost 3,000 years ago. From the rise of the Neo-Assyrian Empire in the 8th century BC until the collapse of the British and French empires in the mid-20th century AD, the Middle East passed from the hands of one empire into the hands of another like a baton in a relay race, and by the time the British and France finally dropped the baton, the Arameans, the Ammonites, the Phoenicians, the Philistines, the Moabites, the Edomites, and the other people conquered by Assyri- Assyrians had long disappeared. True, today's Jews, Armenians, and Georgians claim with some measure of justice that they are offspring of ancient Middle Eastern peoples, yet they yet they are yet these are only exceptions that prove the rule, and even these claims are somewhat exaggerated. It goes without saying that the political, economic, and social practices of modern Jews, for example, owe far more to the empires under which they lived during the past 2 millennia than to the traditions of the ancient kingdom of Judea. If King David were to show up in an ultra Orthodox synagogue, synagogue in present day Jerusalem, he would be utterly bewildered to find people dressed in East European clothes, speaking a German dialect, Yiddish, and having endless arguments about the meaning of a Babylonian text, the Talmud. There were neither synagogues, volumes of Talmud, nor even Torah scrolls in ancient Judea. Buildings and maintaining an empire usually require the vicious slaughter of large populations and brutal oppression of every two who was left. The standard imperial toolkit included wars, enslavement, deportation, and genocide. Genocide. When the Romans invaded Scotland in 83, they were met by fierce resistance from local Caledonian tribes and reacted by laying waste to the country. In reply to Roman peace offers, the chieftain Candaceus called the Romans ruffians, the ruffians of the world, and said that to plunder, slaughter, and robbery they give the lying name of empire. They make a desert. They make a desert and call it peace. This does not mean, however, that empires leave nothing of value in their wake. To color all empires black and to disavow all imperial legacy is to retract most of human culture. Imperial elites use the profits of conquest to finance not only armies and forts but also philosophy, art, justice, and charity. A significant prop, a significant proportion a significant proportion of humanity's cultural achievements owe their existence to the exploitation of conquered populations, the profits and prosperity brought by Roman imperialism provided Cicero, Seneca, and St. Augustine with the leisure and wherewithal to think and write. The Taj Mahal could not have been built without the wealth accumulated by Mughal exploitation of their Indian subjects, and the Habsburg Empire's profits from its rule over its Slavic, Hungarian, and Romanian-speaking provinces paid hidden salaries and Mozart's commissions. No, no Caledonian writer preserved Candaceus' speech for posterity. We know of it signed to the Roman historian Tacitus. In fact, Tacitus probably made it up. Most scholars today agree that Tacitus not only fabricated the speech but invented the character of Canghicus, the Caledonian chieftain, to serve as a mouthpiece for what he and other upper class Romans thought about their own country. if Even if we look beyond elite culture and high art and focus instead on the world of common people, we find imperial legacies in the majority of modern cultures. Today, most of us speak, think, and dream in imperial languages that were forced upon our ancestors by the sword. Most East Asians speak and dream in the language of the Han Empire, no matter what their origins. Nearly all the inhabitants of the two American continents, from Alaska Barrow Peninsula to the Straits of Magellan, communicate in one of four languages: Portuguese, French, or English. Present days Egyptians speak Arabic, think of themselves as Arabs, and identify wholeheartedly with the Arab Empire that conquered Egypt in the 7th century and crushed with an iron fist repeated revolts that broke out against its rule. About 10 million Zulus in South Africa hark back to the Zulu Age of Glory in the 19th century, even though most of them descend from tribes who fought against the Zulu Empire and were incorporated into it only through bloody military campaigns. It's for your own good. Nó là để dành cho điều tốt đẹp của chính bạn. Vì lợi ích. Xem là lợi ích gì nào. The first empire about which we have definitive information was the Akkadian Empire of Sagor the Great, c. 2250 2250. Replay. Beat the rate. Nào cũng drop frame. Nó drop liên tục đấy, mạng gì mà chán thế. Cái này có cái dây mạng không? Như có. Cắm cái dây mạng vào đây xem sao. The first empire about which we have definite definitive information was the Akkadian Empire of Sargon the Great, c. 2250 BC. Sargon began his career as the king of Kish, a small city-state in Mesopotamia. Within a few decades, he managed to conquer not only all other Mesopotamian city-states, but also large territory outside the Mesopotamian heartland. Sargon boasted that he had conquered the entire world. In reality, his dominion stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean and included most of today's Iraq and Syria, along with a few slices of modern Iran and Turkey. The Akkadian Empire did not last long after its founder's death, but Sargon left behind an imperial mantle that seldom remained unclaimed. For the next 1700 years, Assyrian, Babylonian, and Hittite kings adopted Sargon as a role model, boasting that they too had conquered the entire world. Then, around 550 BC, Cyrus the Great of Persia came along with even more impressive boast. The Akkadian Empire, the Persian Empire. The kings of Assyria always remain the kings of Assyria. Even when they claim to rule the entire world, it is obvious that they were doing it for the greater glory of Assyria, and they were not apologetic about it. Cyrus, on the other hand, claimed not merely to rule the whole world, but to do so for the sake of all people. "We are conquering you for your own benefit," said the Persians. Cyrus wanted the peoples he subjected to love him and to count themselves lucky to be Persian vassals. The most famous example of Cyrus' innovative efforts to gain the approbation of a nation living under the thumb of his empire was his command that the Jewish exiles in Babylonia be allowed to return to their Judean homeland and rebuild their temple. He even offered them financial assistance. Cyrus did not see himself as a Persian king ruling over Jews. He was also the king of the Jews and thus responsible for their welfare. The presumption to rule the entire world for the benefit of all its inhabitants was startling. Evolution has made Homo sapiens, like other social mammals, a xenophobic creature. Sapiens instinctively divide humanity into two parts, we and they. We are people like you and me who share our language, religion, and customs. We are all responsible for each other, but not responsible for them. We were always distinct from them and owe them nothing. We don't want to see any of them in our territory, and we don't care an iota what happens in their territory. They are barely even human. In the language of Dinka people of the Sudan, Dinka simply mean people. People who are not Dinka are not people. The Dinka's bitter enemies are the Nuer. What does the word Nuer means in Nuer language? It means original people. Thousands of kilometers from the Sudan deserts, in the frozen island of Alaska and northeastern Siberia, live the Yupiks, What does Yupik mean in Yupik language? It means real people. In contrast with ethnic exclusiveness, imperial ideology from Cyrus onwards has tended to be inclusive, all encompassing, even though it has often emphasized racial and cultural differences between rulers and ruled. It has still recognized the basic unity of the entire world, the existence of a single set of principles governing all places and times, and the mutual responsibility of all human beings. Humankind is seen as a large family. The privilege of the parents go hand in hand with the responsibility for the welfare of the children. Trong này đau họng rồi, không đau được nhỉ? This new imperial vision passed from Cyrus and the Persians to Alexander the Great, and from him to Hellenistic kings, Roman emperors, Muslim caliphs, Indian dynasts, and eventually even to Soviet premiers and American presidents. This benevolent imperial vision had justified the existence of empires and negated not only attempts by subject peoples to rebel but also attempts by independent peoples to resist imperial expansions. Similar imperial visions were developed independently of the Persian model in other parts of the world, most notably in Central America, in the Andean region, and in China. According to traditional Chinese political theory, heaven, Tian, is the source of all legitimate authority on earth. Heaven chooses the most worthy person of family and gives them the mandate of heaven. This person or family then rules over all under heaven. Thiên địa, for the benefit of all its inhabitants. Thus, a legitimate authority is by definition universal. If a ruler lacks a mandate of heaven, then he lacks legitimacy to rule even a single city. If a ruler enjoys the mandate, he is obliged to spread justice and harmony to the entire world. The mandate of heaven could not be given to several candidates simultaneously, and consequently, one could not legitimize the existence of more than one independent state. The first emperor of the United Chinese Empire, Queen Sinh Hoàng đế, Tần Thủy Hoàng đế, boasted that throughout the six directions of the universe, everything belongs to the emperor. 6 hướng, mọi thứ thuộc về hoàng đế. Wherever there is a human footprint, there is not one who did not become a subject of the emperor. His kindness reaches even oxen and horses. There is not one who did not benefit. Every man is safe under his own roof. In Chinese political thinking as well as Chinese historical memory, imperial period was henceforth seen as golden age of order and justice, in contradiction to the modern Western view that a just world is composed of separate nation states. In China, periods of political fragmentation were seen as dark ages of chaos and injustice. This perception has had far-reaching implications for Chinese history. Even time an empire collapsed, the dominant political theory guarded the power that be not to settle for partly independent principalities, but to attempt reunification. Sooner or later, these attempts always succeeded. When they become us. Khi nào họ trở thành chúng ta? Empires have played a decisive part in amalgamating many small cultures. Part in amalgamating many small cultures into fewer big cultures. With or into. Hay nghĩa. Công đoàn Thượng Điện đang có kế hoạch sáp nhập. Các văn phòng này sẽ được sáp nhập thành sáp nhập. Amalgamate 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 Empires have played a decisive part in amalgamating many small cultures into fewer big cultures. Ideas, people, goods, and technology spread more easily within the border of an empire than in a politically fragmented region. Often enough, it was the empires themselves which deliberately spread ideas, institutions, customs, and norms. One reason was to make life easier for themselves. It is difficult to rule an empire in which every little district has its own set of laws, its own form of writing, its own language, and its own money. Standardization was a boon to emperors. A second and equally important reason why empires actively spread a common culture was to gain legitimacy, at least since the days of Cyrus and Queen Huangdi. Empires have justified their actions, whether road building or bloodshed, as necessary to spread a superior culture from which the conquered benefit even more than the conquerors. The benefits were sometimes salient: law enforcement, urban planning, standardization of weights and measures, and sometimes questionable taxes, conscriptions, emperor's worship. But most imperial elites earnestly believed that they were working for the general welfare of all the empire inhabitants. China's ruling class treated their country's neighbors and its foreign subjects as miserable barbarians to whom the empire must bring the benefits of culture. The mandate of heaven was bestowed upon the emperors not in order to exploit the world, but in order to educate humanity. The Roman too justified their dominion by arguing that they were endowing the barbarian with peace, justice, and refinement. The wine Germans and painted Gauls have lived in squalor and ignorance until the Romans timed them with law, cleaned them up in public bathhouse and improved them with philosophy. The Mauryan Empire in the 3rd century BC took as its mission the dissemination of Buddha teachings to an ignorant world. The Muslim caliphs received a divine mandate to spread the prophet's revelation peacefully if possible, but by the sword if necessary. The Spanish and Portuguese empires proclaimed that it was not riches they sought in the Indies and America, but converts to the true faith. The sun never set on the British mission to spread the twin gospels of liberalism and free trade. Liberalism and free trade. The Soviets felt duty bound to facilitate the inexorable historical march from capitalism towards the utopian dictatorship of the proletariat. Many Americans nowadays maintain that their government has a moral imperative to bring third world countries the benefits of democracy and human rights, even if these goods are delivered by cruise missiles and F-16s. Rất là nhiều người Mỹ bây giờ đang ảo tưởng là nhà nước chúng nó đang mang mấy cái tự do bình đẳng bác ái, nhưng mà những cái đấy toàn là tên lửa. Fighting Falcon 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. Đấy, đây là cái chữ good ở đầu bài đấy. And they become us. Đây. Chính là lợi ích của bạn. The cultural idea spread by empire was seldom the exclusive creation of the ruling elite, since the imperial vision tends to be universal and inclusive. It was relatively easy for imperial elite to adopt ideas, norms, and traditions from wherever they found them, rather than to stick fanatically to a single hidebound tradition, while some emperors sought to purify their culture and return to what they viewed as their roots. For the most part, empires have begot hybrid civilizations that absorbed much from their subject peoples. The imperial cultures of Rome was Greek almost as much as Roman. The imperial Abbasid culture was part of Persian, part of Greek, part Arab. Imperial Mongol culture was a Chinese copycat. In the imperial United States, an American president of Kenyan blood can munch on Italian pizza while watching his favorite film, Lawrence of Arabia, a British epic about the Arab rebellion against the Turks. Note that this cultural melting pot made the process of cultural assimilation many easier for the vanquished. The imperial civilization may well have absorbed numerous contributions from various conquered peoples, but the hybrid result was still alien to the maturity. The process of assimilation was often painful and traumatic. It's not easy to give up a familiar and loved local tradition, just as it is difficult and stressful to understand and adopt a new culture. Worse still, even when subject peoples were successful in adopting the imperial culture, it could take decades, if not centuries, until the imperial elite accepted them as part of us. The generation between conquest and acceptance were left out the cold. They had already lost their beloved local culture, but they were not allowed to take an equal part of the imperial world. In the contrary, their adopted culture continued to view them as barbarians. Imagine an Imagine an Iberian of good stock living a century after the fall of Numantia. He speaks his native Celtic dialect with his parents, but has acquired impeccable Latin with only a slight accent. Because he needed to conduct his business and deal with authorities, he indulged his wife's penchant of elaborately ornate baubles, but is a bit embarrassed that she, like other local women, retains his relic of Celtic taste. He'd rather have her adopt the clean simplicity of the jewelry worn by the Roman governor's wife. He himself wears a Roman tunics and, thanks to his success as a cattle merchant, due in no small part to his expertise in intricacy of Roman commercial law, he has been able to build a Roman-style villa. Yet, even though he can recite Book 3 of Virgil's Georgics by heart, the Romans still treat him as though he is semi-barbarian. He realized with his frustration that he'll never get a government appointment or one of really good seats in the amphitheater. In the late 19th century, many educated Indians were taught in the same lesson by the British master. One famous anecdote tells of an ambitious Indian who mastered in intricacies of the English language, took lessons in Western style dance, and even became accustomed to eating with a knife and fork. Equipped with his new manner, he traveled to England, studied law at University College London, and became a qualified barrister. Yet this young man of law, bedecked in suit and tie, was rolled off a train in the British colony of South Africa for insisting on traveling first class instead of settling for third class, where colored men like him were supposed to ride. His name was Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. In some cases, the processes of acculturation and assimilation eventually broke down the barriers between the newcomers and the old elite. The conqueror no longer saw the empire as an alliance system of occupation, and the conquerors came to view their subjects as equal to themselves. Rulers and ruled alike came to see them as us. All the subjects of Rome eventually, after centuries of imperial rule, were granted Roman citizenship. Non-Roman rose to occupy the top ranks in the officer corps of the Roman legions and were appointed to the Senate. In AD 48, the Emperor Claudius admitted to the Senate several Gallic notables, who he noted in a speech, through custom, culture, and the times of marriage, have blended with ourselves. Snobbish senators protest, introducing these former enemies into the heart of the Roman political system. Claudius reminded them of an inconvenient truth. Most of their own senatorial families descended from Italian tribes who once fought against Rome and were later granted Roman citizenship. Indeed, the emperor reminded them his own family was of Sabine ancestry, During the 2nd century AD, Rome was ruled by a line of emperors born in Iberia, in whose vein probably flowed at least a few drops of local Iberian blood. The veins of Trajan, Hadrian, Antonius, Pius, and Marcus Aurelius are generally thought to constitute the Empire Golden Age. After that, all the ethnic dams were let down. Emperor Septimus Severus, 893 to 211, was the scion of a Punic family from Libya. Elagabalus, 218 to 22, was the Syrian. Emperor Philip, 244 to 9, was known colloquially as Philip the Arab. The empire's new citizen adopted Roman imperial culture, which suggests that for centuries and even millennia after the empire itself collapsed, they continued to speak the empire's language, to believe in the Christian God that the empire had adopted from one of its Levantine provinces, and to live by the empire's law. A similar process occurred in the Arab Empire when it was established in the mid-7th century AD. It was based on the sharp division between the ruling Arab Muslim elite and the subjugated Egyptians, Syrians, Iranians, and Berbers, who were neither Arabs nor Muslim. Many of the empire's subjects gradually adopted the Muslim faith, the Arabic language, and a hybrid imperial culture. The old Arab elite looked upon these parvenus with deep hostility, fearing to lose its unique status and identity. The frustrated converts clamor for an equal share within the empire and in the world of Islam. Eventually, they got their way. Egyptians, Syrians, and Mesopotamians were increasingly seen as Arabs. Arabs, in their turn, whether authentic Arab from Arabia or newly minted Arab from Egypt and Syria, came to be increasingly dominated by non-Arab Muslims, in particular by Iranians, Turks, and Berbers. The great success of the Arab imperial project was that imperial culture it created was wholeheartedly adopted by numerous non-Arab people who continued to uphold it, develop it, and spread it even after the origin empire collapsed and the Arab, as an ethnic group, lost their dominion. In China, the success of the imperial projects was even more thorough. For more than 2,000 years, a wealth of ethnic and cultural groups, first termed barbarians, were successfully integrated into Imperial Chinese culture and became Han Chinese, so named after Han Empire that ruled China from 206 BC to AD 220. The ultimate achievement of the Chinese Empire is that it is still alive and kicking, yet it's hard to see it as an empire except in outlying areas such as Tibet and Xinjiang. More than 90% of the population of China are seen by themselves and by others as Han. We can understand the decolonization process of the last few decades in a similar way. During the modern era, Europeans conquered much of the globe under the guise of spreading a superior Western culture. They were so successful that billions of people gradually adopted significant parts of that culture. Indian, Africans, Arabs, Chinese, and Maoris learned French, English, and Spanish. They began to believe in human rights and the principle of self-determination, and they adopt Western ideologies such as liberalism, capitalism, communism, feminism, and nationalism. Imperial cycle, vòng lặp đế chế, người tốt và người xấu trong lịch sử. Sắp tới có vẻ hay đây. Ok, đến đây thôi. Hôm nay mệt quá ta. 43 về 47, thế là hôm nay chỉ được có 4% thôi, hôm nay còn chưa được đến 5% nữa. So bye bye.